There is a noise your Volvo can make that costs about $40 in parts to fix and about $7,000 to ignore. It is not loud, it does not turn on a warning light. On an older 5-cylinder Volvo, it sounds like a cricket living behind the plastic cover on the front of the engine, and it usually shows up in the first 30 seconds after a cold start and then fades once things warm up, which is exactly why owners decide it is nothing. That one is number 1 on this list. We are saving it for the end because if you drive a 5-cylinder S60 or V70 or XC90, it is the single most expensive sound your car will ever make. And almost every owner who lost an engine to it will tell you the same thing. They heard it for months. Everything else your Volvo does has a name too. The clunk over expansion joints. The drone at 45 miles an hour that changes the second you lift off the gas. The whistle at idle that stops the moment you crack the oil filler cap. The squeal from the front brakes that, strangely enough, usually means your pads are fine. Volvos are honest cars. They tell you what is wrong long before anything actually fails. The problem is that almost nobody speaks the language, so here is the whole vocabulary, working from the noises that cost you nothing up to the one that ends an engine. Before we start, one thing that will make the rest of this make sense. Volvo builds cars in platform generations, and the noise your car makes depends almost entirely on which generation you own. P2 covers the 1999 to 2006 S80. The 2001 to 2007 V70 and XC70, the 2001 to 2009 S60 and the XC90, all the way from 2003 to 2014. P1 is the smaller stuff, the S40, the V50, the C30, the C70. P3 runs from roughly 2007 to 2018 and covers the later S80, XC70, XC60, S60 and V60. And SPA is the modern architecture, starting with the 2016 XC90 and rolling out to the S90, the V90, the 2018 XC60 and the 2019 S60 and V60. Different bones, different noises. A P2 owner and an SPA owner can describe the exact same whistle and be talking about two completely different parts. Number 10. The rattle from the back that gets worse when everything is locked shut. Start with the contradiction. A loose tailgate should rattle when it is loose. On the P2 wagon and on the older XC90, the rattle from the rear of the car often gets worse over rough pavement, precisely because the latch is doing its job. The latch pulls the tailgate tight against worn rubber bump stops that have gone hard and shrunk over 20 years, and the panel ends up drumming against a mount that no longer has any give in it. Same story with the sunroof. The rattle you hear over speed bumps is usually the glass panel sitting on dried-out guide rails with the grease long gone. Neither costs real money. Sunroof rails want cleaning and a fresh coat of white lithium grease, not the spray can lubricant in your garage, which washes the old grease out and makes it worse a month later. Tailgate rattles come down to adjusting the rubber stops so the panel sits under tension, or replacing them for the price of lunch. Worth knowing because a rattle is the one Volvo noise you are allowed to ignore. Almost nothing else on this list is. Number 9. The brake squeal that means your brakes are fine. 9 out of 10 owners hear a squeal from the front wheels and book a brake job. Wrong instinct most of the time. A high-pitched squeal that shows up on light pedal pressure, disappears when you brake hard, and is worse on cold, damp mornings, is almost always pad vibration. Semi-metallic compounds, a bit of surface rust, a missing shim. Annoying, harmless. The pads can have half their life left. The genuinely dangerous version sounds nothing like it. It is a grinding, grating scrape that gets louder the harder you press, and by then, you are cutting into the rotor with a metal backing plate. And this is where Volvo specifically catches people out. A lot of these cars do not use a mechanical squealer tab at all. They use an electrical wear sensor buried in the pad that grounds out and puts a message on your dash. That sensor lives on one wheel, sometimes two, not all four, so you can have 3 corners worn down to nothing and a perfectly quiet, perfectly dark dashboard, because the one pad wearing a sensor happens to be the one that lasted. If you have owned your Volvo for less than a year, go look at the pad thickness yourself. Do not wait for the car to tell you. Number 8. The whistle at idle that everybody blames on the turbo. Pop the hood on a warm Volvo at idle and listen for a thin, steady whistle, somewhere between a kettle and a small flute. The first guess is always the turbo, and the second guess is a vacuum leak in a hose somewhere. Both wrong nearly every time. That whistle is the crankcase ventilation system. On the 5-cylinder engines, it is a plastic oil trap box that clogs with sludge and splits. On the modern 2-litre Drive E 4-cylinders, roughly 2014 onward, across the S60, S90, V60, XC40, XC60 and XC90, the ventilation system is integrated into the valve cover itself, and there is a rubber diaphragm inside it that tears. Unmetered air gets pulled through the tear and the engine sings. 10-second test, no tools. With the engine idling, crack the oil filler cap. If the whistle stops dead and the cap tries to suck itself back down onto the neck, that is your answer. Why it matters more than it sounds. A crankcase that cannot vent builds pressure, and that pressure pushes oil out through every seal you own, starting with the rear main. Owners chase a lean running code, a rough idle, and rising oil consumption for months without ever connecting them to a whistle. The repair on the newer 4-cylinder is a diaphragm kit and about an hour of labour. Ignore it and you are pricing a rear main seal job instead, which means the transmission comes out. Number 7. The clunk over expansion joints that is not the strut. Single dull knock from one front corner when the wheel drops into a pothole or crosses a tar strip. Steering that feels a beat late off-centre. On the P3 cars, the S60, V60, XC60 and later XC70, this is the front lower control arm and specifically the rubber bushings pressed into it. The unfair part is that Volvo does not sell you a bushing. The bushings and the ball joint are not serviceable separately, so a worn $12 piece of rubber means a complete control arm on that side. There is a second noise living in the same neighbourhood that people confuse with it constantly. If the sound is a dry, gritty scrape or a groan that happens while you are turning the wheel, sitting still in a parking lot, that is the strut mount bearing, not the arm. Bushings clunk over bumps, mounts grind while turning. 2 different parts, 2 different bills. While you are under there, check the rear trailing arm bushings, because on P3 cars, owners report those going soft as early as 60,000 miles, well before anything else in the rear suspension. That one does not clunk, it just makes the back of the car feel vague and nervous on the highway, and people blame the tyres. Number 6. The buzzing that starts after you switch the engine off. You park, shut the car down, and something under the hood keeps running for a minute or two. Sounds like a small electric motor with a stone caught in it. On the modern 4-cylinder Volvos, that is an auxiliary electric coolant pump, and it is supposed to run after shutdown. Turbocharged engines soak heat after you park, and the pump keeps coolant circulating so the turbo bearing does not cook. A healthy one is a soft hum you have to lean in to hear. Once the bearing in that pump starts to go, the hum turns into a buzz or a grinding whir, and owners report it getting loud enough to hear from inside the house. Then it stops running at all, and nothing on your dash mentions it, because a pump that has quietly died after shutdown does not throw a temperature warning. It just removes the protection your turbo was built around. Same logic applies to the noise you hear from the front of the car during a hard climb on a hot day. A faint gurgle behind the dash is air in the cooling system. Air in the system means coolant went somewhere, and coolant going somewhere on a turbocharged Volvo is never a story that ends cheaply. Number 5. The drone at highway speed that everyone diagnoses as a wheel bearing. Steady drone or whine that arrives around 40 miles an hour, rises with road speed rather than engine speed, and changes character when you lift off the gas. Every forum thread, every quick opinion at the tyre shop, same answer. Wheel bearing. Here is how you kill that guess in 10 seconds. A bad wheel bearing changes with steering load. Sweep the car gently left, then gently right, at the speed where the noise is loudest. If it gets louder loading one side and quieter loading the other, it is a bearing. If the noise does not care what the steering wheel is doing and instead tracks with throttle, look at the angle gear. The angle gear is the small right-angle box bolted to the transmission on an all-wheel drive Volvo that turns the power 90 degrees to send it back to the rear axle. There are two separate failures here, and the difference is thousands of dollars. On the 2012 to 2016 S60, XC60 and XC70, plus the V60 and S80 of that era, the common one is not the gear at all. It is a collar sleeve, a small splined connector between the transmission and the angle gear, and its internal splines strip out. If your only symptom is silently losing all-wheel drive with no noise, that sleeve is a few $100s in parts. But if it is making noise, grinding, clunking or whining, the gears and bearings inside are already chewed, and you are looking at a used assembly plus 4 hours of labour. There has been no recall for this. Volvo never issued one. Number 4. The whine from behind the rear seats. Paradox first. The part of your all-wheel drive system most likely to fail is the part that spends most of its life doing nothing at all. On an all-wheel drive Volvo, the rear axle is normally along for the ride. A Haldex coupling sits in front of the rear differential and only clamps power to the back wheels when the fronts start to slip. The 5th generation version of that coupling, on cars from roughly 2013 onward, including the XC60, XC70, S60, V60, V70 and later XC90, uses an electric charge pump with a fine gauze screen in front of it. The failure follows a script. As the clutch pack wears, friction material sheds into the oil, and that debris blinds the screen. The pump starves, and the car quietly becomes front-wheel drive. Owners report a whine from the rear before it goes, plus a traction warning that comes and goes. And the reason it sneaks up on people is that the earlier system had a serviceable external filter you could change. The 5th generation does not. If nobody has ever changed the Haldex oil on your XC90 or XC60 and you bought it used, assume nobody has. Fresh oil and a screen clean is a service. A dead pump plus a housing full of clutch debris is a repair. And if the shop skips cleaning the debris out, the new pump dies too. We are about to hit the 3 noises that empty a bank account, starting with the clunk your transmission makes on the first drive of the day. Before that, pause and drop your answer in the comments. Which noise on this list did your Volvo make first? I go through the comments on every video, and half of you are about to describe an angle gear and call it a wheel bearing. And since you are already paused, one more thing. Write down exactly when your noise happens. Cold or hot, turning or straight, throttle on or off. Now the top 3. Number 3. The clunk from underneath on the first drive of the day. Cold morning, you back out, put it into drive, and the car thunks. Later, coasting down to a stoplight, it thunks again, dropping into the lower gears. And sometimes, pulling away gently, the engine revs climb between second and third, with nothing actually happening at the wheels. That last one has a name, shift flare, and it is the clearest early warning the Asian automatics in these cars ever give you. Volvo used a family of Asian units across the P2 and P3 era, the older AW55-50SN and the 6-speed TF-80SC that turns up in the later XC90 and the bigger engines, and they share a weak point. Solenoid bores in the valve body wear oval, pressure leaks past, and shifts go soft and late. Now, the part that makes people angry. Dirty fluid is what wears those bores. And the fluid pulses constantly to control pressure, so contamination does real mechanical damage. These transmissions have no serviceable filter, and for years, the party line was that the fluid was filled for life. It is not. Specialists who work on these units for a living recommend flushing every 45,000 miles or sooner, and a control module software update at a shop with the Volvo diagnostic system, because some of the harsh shifting is calibration rather than hardware. A fluid service is a couple $100. A rebuilt Ison is a $5,000 afternoon. And once the shudder is constant, fresh fluid will not save it. Number 2. The supercharger that goes quiet. The Drive ET6 and T8 engines are twin-charged, which means a belt-driven supercharger handles the bottom of the rev range, and an exhaust-driven turbo takes over up top. So they whine. A rising mechanical whine under acceleration on a T6 is normal, and half the owners on the forums love it, which sets up the trap. A well-documented failure on these engines is the electromagnetic clutch that engages the supercharger, and when it goes, the whine goes with it. The car does not get louder, it gets quieter and slower off the line, and perfectly normal once you are already rolling. It very often throws no check engine light at all. Owners describe it as the car feeling lazy from a stop and blame themselves, or the gas, or the weather. The turbo side announces itself differently. A high-pitched shriek like a dentist drill under boost, or blue smoke, means the turbo bearing is going. And there is a nasty link between the two. The 2-litre 4-cylinder and 2.5-litre 5-cylinder engines in 2013 to 2016 cars have a long record of oil consumption complaints filed with federal safety regulators, with owners reporting quarts disappearing between services and engines failing outright. An engine burning oil starves the turbo bearing that depends on it. So before anyone sells you a turbo, find out why the old one died. The clutch is not sold separately. It is the whole supercharger assembly or nothing, and labour alone runs into 4 figures. Number 1. The cricket behind the timing cover. Faint chirp, tick or squeak from the front of the engine, loudest in the first minute of a cold start, gone once everything expands and warms up. It sounds like something trivial. It is the sound of an idler pulley bearing or a tensioner bearing beginning to seize behind your timing belt cover. Here is why it sits at number 1. Volvo timing belts almost never snap on their own. Modern belts are massively over-engineered. What kills them is exactly what you are hearing: a bearing that grinds itself to pieces, seizes, and either shreds the belt or lets it jump teeth. And every one of these engines is an interference design. When the belt stops turning the camshafts, the pistons keep coming up and the valves are in the way. Bent valves at best, a scrapped cylinder head, and plenty of owners simply buy another engine. The intervals are not a mystery. Volvo published guidance covering model years 1999 through 2015, and the 2.5-litre 5-cylinder generally wants a belt and tensioner around every 120,000 miles. The modern 2-litre Drive E 4-cylinder runs a much longer interval, roughly 150,000 miles. And Volvo sets a time limit alongside it that matters as much as the mileage on a low-use car. On the 5-cylinder, the belt also drives the water pump, which is why the pump goes in as part of the same job. A belt kit with pump and tensioner is one of the cheapest major services this car will ever ask for. A cylinder head is not. So there it is, that cricket chirping away for 30 seconds on a cold morning is the most expensive noise your Volvo will ever make, and it is also the easiest one to fix, which is the whole cruel joke of owning one of these cars. Everything on this list follows that same shape. The noises that cost nothing are the loud ones. The noises that cost everything are the ones you have to lean in and listen for. A rattling tailgate will scream at you for a decade and never cost $1. A whistle you can barely hear at idle quietly turns into a transmission removal. Learn the 4 questions and you can diagnose almost anything on this car. Cold or hot, speed or engine revs, steering loaded or straight, throttle on or off. Answer those 4 before you call a shop and you will already be ahead of the person writing your estimate, because half of what you pay a dealer for is somebody sitting in the driver's seat asking those exact questions on your behalf. If you want to know what these cars do next, watch the video on the mileage, where Volvos actually start costing money, because 3 of the parts we just talked about show up there, right on schedule.